So on behalf of the Victorian Public Sector Commission and the Australian New Zealand School of Government, can I welcome you all here today most sincerely. I'm surprised how many people I know in the audience, but those I don't, I'm Peter Allen. Until recently I was Deputy Dean at ANZSOG, and in an earlier life was the Victorian Public Sector Standards Commissioner. And I am delighted to be here today with Minister Jennings, who is the Special Minister of State and Leader of the Government in the Legislative Council, two very challenging roles. Can I also, in this forum, acknowledge the passing and contribution of former Victorian Premier Joan Kirner. Premier Kirner was not only a powerful advocate for the role of women in public life, but was a great advocate for the importance of public services in community life and a great supporter of the contribution of public servants. Those of you who've made it today are clearly attentive, which is very encouraging for us at ANZSOG, clearly attentive to the forward program, because when this forum was put up on Eventbrite, it was 15 minutes before it was full. And we're told by Eventbrite that that sort of is up there with Paul McCartney and Justin Bieber concerts. We're following a slightly different format to our discussion today. First of all, I'm planning to ask Gavin some questions. We'll then call on our distinguished ANZSOG alumni, Judith Abbott, Leon Eggleston and Bronwyn Fitzgerald, to ask questions of the Minister, and then it'll be over to you. And as I said, we'll get you out of here by 1:45. So can I begin by asking Gavin you for some personal reflections on your role as Special Minister for State. At the Commonwealth level, my recollection is that the office was created during the Whitlam government and over the years has been occupied from some very experienced political leaders. In terms of your own career, both inside and outside Parliament, I'd be interested in how you see the roles and responsibilities, how the various roles and responsibilities in public life prepared you for these new responsibilities as Special Minister for State.
Okay, well that's a very easy brief, Peter, thank you. And the good news is I will not take all our time. You'll have your opportunity. Personal reflections won't take the hour and a quarter. I actually think it's very important that you actually have a sense of who I am and how I got here, and I'll just briefly pick up some of the touchstones that make me who I am and some of the values that I bring to the job. So I grew up in country Victoria, but growing up in country Victoria, I knew, even though in fact in a state like ourselves, that I was dislocated. My family was dislocated from a lot of the services that people relied on, they need in life. That was very evident to me through those formative years. I also understood the key importance of how education was my road to the future. My family knew that. Certainly that was the building blocks of me then coming to Melbourne, university career. At university I discovered that few important things. I immersed myself in politics, I immersed myself in economics for a while, certainly sociology, certainly research design, certainly communication of public policy was the hallmark of my university career. I actually learnt the valuable lesson that if you're sitting in a political environment and you do not hear the bleeding obvious being said, it's sometimes because the bleeding obvious hasn't been recognised. And I realised that a little bit late in my university career, that I always thought that some of the esoteric tangents that people went off was because I just wasn't keeping up with where they were at. But in fact, on reflection, that wasn't the case. So political message for me from very early days was, if you're in a political environment and you're not hearing the bleeding obvious being said, then it needs to be said. If you're in any political forum where you actually feel that what has to be said is not being said, then say it. And that has been my political method from that time till now. It quite often makes me a contrarian, but in fact it's very important for that to occur. Then I had the good fortune for not only then immersing myself in a very difficult policy environment, working in social work in the Aboriginal community in Fitzroy. I chose that as a challenge to dig in deep in relation to some very vexing policy issues, challenging personal issues. And can I say to you, as challenging as my political life is, the day-to-day experience of working as a social worker in that environment was as tough as it comes. It's one of the reasons why I have great respect for anybody who works in that field in terms of the personal wherewithal that's required each and every day to deliver outcomes to keep people safe. I can say to you that I'm very, very, very mindful of that. I've just given myself goosebumps thinking about some of those pressures that people endure every day in their working life. I then had the good fortune to come and work in the health department for some time on Aboriginal health, then worked through the cycles of budget preparation, of policy development within the bureaucracy. I understood how the cycle of government policy development works, then landed working for a minister in the Kane government and working at the interface between that policy enthusiasm, the compassion, the commitment that I thought my personal values and my party's values took me to that place, to actually interface within how you work with the public service to give life to it, to have some quality assurance in the way in which you go about the preparation of your work, the engagement with the community and the respect of alternative points of view, of testing those, of assessing those and making sure that they are implemented with rigour and with determination and inclusion. And I say that in point of inclusion to make a comment at the fact that I ended up working for John Kane and Joan Kerner, and I learnt a whole new series of things about inclusion and community development, by and large through Joan's amazing commitment to our community. So I thank Peter for recognising that. That was a remarkable experience from me. When you actually think about consultation and inclusion and you think that you've gone through to the nth degree and you've just about finished, Joan would start again. So that's actually something that was a fantastic work ethic, not necessarily the most productive work ethic, because at some point in time there is a need to stop consulting and get on with doing things. But from that time, I understood from a political vantage point, from working with the public service, a clear sense of difference, a clear moral compass in relation to what's right or wrong in terms of good practice, inclusion, being evidence-based, being innovative, to actually drive reforms, to be a reforming government. That's the thing that we're interested in. And so let's just stop now of actually saying from that moment to now, in terms of my political career, they are the values that I have personally developed, that I actually want to be measured by. I would like my colleagues to be measured by. I would like us all to be measured by, even though we play different roles in that journey of actually commitment to public benefit in the name of better outcomes for our citizens, and that's the suite of measures that drive me and hopefully will make a contribution to my role.
Can we talk a little bit about your perceptions of the Victorian public sector? I suspect most people in this room, if not all people in this room, would put up their hands identifying Victoria as the best public sector in Australia. And it's certainly true that in the past, Victoria, and I remember particularly the work of Premier Braxton Brumby, have led national reform agendas. And what I suppose the question is, what do you see as the key markers of public sector capability, and how well do you think Victoria currently measures up?
Okay, well, I think I'd like to have a challenge to us all. You know, reputationally, Victorian public sector has been seen, or public service has been seen in that way. I'm not sure that's a contemporary setting. I'm not sure that's our challenge, to actually be measured by others to living up to that expectation. Certainly, that's an expectation that I would have for us, and I want to work with people on. But it's not an inbuilt assumption that I make. I think in terms of then what is the opportunity of the public service to work with the Victorian Government at the moment, how it relates to capability, is that I would encourage people to think of the mandate of the incoming government, the policy prescriptions, the commitment to do what we say we're committed to doing as the foundation for satisfying that in terms of its implementation. But that's the foundation level. Beyond that, in terms of the capability, then I see that there's a whole range of policy momentum that needs to be built, structural change that continues to be implemented, community engagement that needs to occur, advice that needs to be sought, platforms by which we undertake that work have to be rigorously tested, sought out, proven and then applied. So in fact there is a dynamic that is required on all of us to actually say that near enough is not good enough. The way that what we have confidence in terms of what our strengths are, in terms of our knowledge base, in terms of our ability to engage with our community, with the economy, with some of the major challenges, our desire to engage is very important. Our ability to be astute enough to find the key piece of advice or the best practice that we can actually strive to implement and work in a collaborative way to deliver it, that will be the way in which we see capability being rebuilt, being maintained and in fact to flourish into the future.
And what do you see, or what would you suspect your colleague ministers see as the key capabilities that they would like to see in their departments?
Well, certainly, as I've outlined in that sequence, they would certainly have an expectation that on coming to government, what the mandate is that they've arrived at, with what the programs that have been committed as of an incoming government, the budget commitments and the initiatives that we've either outlined now in the budget papers, with which the vast majority of our initiatives have either been funded or partially funded or earmarked where they're going to come in the budget cycle. So that's actually relatively clear. Beyond that, what they will be seeking is to be appraised of what are the challenges in terms of where are the programmatic gaps, whether the resource gaps, whether in fact there are unmet needs in our community, both in terms of scale of demand, but in terms of the complexity of them. They will be seeking the best advice from the public service about the way in which that need should be filled, how we can equip that, how we can make sure that we take account of the diversity of expectations that are upon us in the name of certainly making sure that no one is left behind. Certainly we have a sense of inclusion, even in major reforms, such as NDIS, which is actually a program embarked upon by this jurisdiction, a national frame, which has very lofty aspirations and nominally an appropriate budget to deal with it. Let's actually have a look at what that means in reality, of how that may be rolled out, whether in fact there are blind spots in need that are not being met. How do we make sure that we account for what is the budget capacity and skill development capacity to be able to meet those expectations over time? So resource is one part of the equation, the right framing of the workforce, the right way in which the services are configured, the right ways, mechanisms of which we empower our citizens. You can see through that prism of NDIS, there's a whole variety of ways, for instance, it's just picking that program, where we need to drill down and have a competency that actually will give life to promises that have been made or promises that are still yet to be made.
Okay, can I follow up a little bit? In terms of looking at the structures and processes of government, the Andrews government very quickly restructured, reduced the numbers of departments and aligned responsibilities differently. And I'd be interested in your reflections on, you know, how important that is and how that relates to the quality of the people actually doing the work and how you get those things connected well.
Okay, well, there's a couple of things that I don't want to be looking in the rearguard in relation to the previous administration. So I don't want to make this overtly political, but can I actually say to you that one thing that I, in my vantage point, and my colleagues feel the need is that the public service not only we rebuild the confidence and the capability, but we actually enable. And provide a commissioning environment in terms of the enthusiasm of the public service to actually be courageous, to actually seek out the best advice, to actually provide frank and fearless advice about the best way in which we can rise up to those challenges. And certainly that would be, from my vantage point, what I'd be hoping to instil in my ministerial colleagues in their engagement with the public service and the public sector more broadly. That will certainly be in my key method of engagement will be to enthuse people to be courageous in their advice, in their thinking, in terms of actually pushing the horizons and the envelopes of what their responsibilities may be. So read them up rather than read them down. Now that's not necessarily an easy thing to just transit into immediately. That's something we need to develop trust and working relationships with people about. But certainly that's what I would like us to get to. In relation to the machinery government matters, there was a couple of major symbolic statements that were made, symbolic but also functional outcomes. One which was the alignment of health and human services, particularly through the prism of the rhetoric of joined up and the intention of joined up services in the community sector, in the human services sector, whilst it had been well versed in some elements of practice, some elements of the commissioning process, some elements through Services Connect, was actually not being, from our vantage point, being crystallised in a way that rose up to meet a real need on the ground, or in fact addresses the structural problems in terms of the shift in resources increasingly within that entire portfolio, increasingly into the hospital sector as distinct from community-based services. So in fact, by design, if you have a look at it, I don't know, as I was Shadow for Health, I don't know how many times I heard that the health budget, or that portfolio's budget was $15 billion. I knew that less than 10 billion of it was spent in hospitals. It was always conflated as the two issues. What is needed in practice is in fact the increasing allocation of hospital-based expenditure in that portfolio, in my view, needs to be reducing over time rather than increasing, and it's increased consistently over the last 15 years. So under governments of different persuasions has actually continued to increase. But what's needed in terms of addressing demand pressures in health and in fact to meet human need is in fact to shift resources the other way. That's easier said than done, but in terms of the realignment of the portfolio, it was designed for that purpose. In relation to the economic development drivers, the infrastructure to support economic activity, all the industry drivers were put together in one centre of gravity, a very large centre of gravity, perhaps a little bit clunky centre of gravity, but nonetheless a centre of gravity in terms of all those key activities in relation to economic activity put together. And similarly, they were married at now, so they're the proponents and instigators of economic drivers, and in fact all the things that actually by and large regulated in terms of land use, opportunity cost in terms of planning, structural, environmental issues, connection with local government, all of those were repurposed, repositioned in relation to a portfolio that from our vantage point makes a lot of sense to actually have an alternative form of regulatory and approval mechanisms of a scale to that department. So that's the underlying logic in relation. So I started with people, I'll end with people. Ultimately, we need people to actually appreciate the logic in that thinking, to actually see the opportunities that are created through it, and to give life to what is our purpose of the activities within our program and areas that we're responsible for.
So can I ask you to connect your early working life, the sort of problems you saw in Fitzroy, mental illness, homelessness, substance abuse, with what government can do in response to those, and particularly the challenge of how do you join up services that are often spread across departments or between government and non-government agencies, join them up in a way that makes sense to someone who's struggling to live?
Well, in fact, you start from that perspective, and you certainly start from, and in fact, so some of the things that I'm saying here may sound as if I'm blind or ignorant of what was the intention around at a policy framing level around Services Connect. So don't start from the assumption that I'm blind to, or the government is blind to what integrity may have been developed from trying to wrap services around individuals or identify the way in which we could effectively coordinate and integrate locally based configuration of services to meet either individuals or household structures, the needs that they have in community, and try to do it in an efficient, coordinated fashion, because that's exactly where we need to get to. But how that occurs is always a great challenge about how that is driven in terms of resource allocation that supports it, in terms of the culture that actually comes from the political rhetoric right through the culture within an organisation, both centrally and on the ground, of how that's delivered, whether in fact the people who deliver the services on the ground are enthused and supported and feel as if they are part of a continuum of effort, where they feel as if their work is appreciated, both in terms of the client base, but in fact the people who actually are making resource decisions and directions on their programmatic behalf. And there seemed to me to be a disconnect. And our challenge as an incoming government is to try to connect those from what happens at the cabinet table to what actually happens in those tables in houses just down the road, in terms of how there is a more direct appreciation of how we get that support there in a meaningful way. We also have to actually be alive to the way in which, in the name of getting better outcomes for those households, we have to actually have a better sense of evaluation of what the effectiveness of our interventions may be. So in some instances, they all might be on terms of support structures and bottom up in terms of just addressing urgent need, hand-to-mouth type of issues, which is in many ways the sort of work that I was doing in many ways when I was working in Fitzroy many years ago, which wasn't satisfactory for me on the basis I just felt personally is that I couldn't survive. I could not survive as a worker operating at that level. There are a lot of people who are working today who still feel as if they cannot survive, but they keep on doing it, and I'm thankful that they do it. But in fact, what we need is, in fact, at all levels, from that level, grassroots, up to people who are working at my level and everybody in between, which might be a lot of people in the room today, to actually have an appreciation of our determination and drive to actually get those outcomes. But we also should make appreciation of what role employment, economic drivers play in their own right. So I'm not necessarily a trickle-down person, you may have guessed, but in terms of the important economic drivers, opportunity drivers, how that interfaces with training and workforce management issues. Ultimately, people need work and they need somewhere to live. And if you provide people with work and somewhere to live, then and appropriately supported where they live, you're 9/10 of the way there. And we should never lose sight of that.
Okay, just another aspect of that issue. During my working life, I've seen government take up more and more responsibilities that previously were acquitted by non-government agencies or local government. and in many cases now you see non-government agencies almost saying they've been disempowered. And I'd be interested in how you see the delivery of services, the partnership between government and non-government agencies being improved in the future, given that there are criticisms on both sides now of the effectiveness of the relationship.
One of the recurring themes of my political life is going back to the not always the bleeding obvious is said. I'm amazed individuals and organisations that disempower themselves or allow themselves to be disempowered. And so that's a reoccurring theme through my life, is that a lot of people, if they get adverse outcomes or they feel as if they're not a participant in a process, choose to see themselves as victims of that and do not re-engage. And you might say that that's an implied criticism of what I thought a lot of non-government sector behaved in the last term. I'm not expecting that to be the case this term. I'm expecting there to be an emboldened response by the non-government sector to their expectations of the current government, and we should embrace it if they are so emboldened, if that means that we have a rigorous and mature relationship, because I think we can plot from time to time how much effort is inside public sector and how much, or public service, and how much is outside. In fact, the extraordinary thing about it's a paradox what you've actually outlined in your question, Peter, because in fact if you have a look at the sheer weight of numbers, in fact the weight of numbers in terms of personnel and effort, in terms of people, is actually shifting out of the public service, whilst in fact most of the determinants of those resource questions are actually, and the decision making about the structure of programs is actually coming in. And what we need to be able to do is to have a shared view about this. So the issues that I'm actually talking about, our capability in the public service today, should actually be read the same issue in terms of capability and shared experience and shared endeavour, and we should work on it across public service, public sector, non-government agencies who are working in this field. And one of the great challenges for any tier of government is to be mature enough to be able to be clear about what it wants to do, set clear policy directions, but be sufficiently committed to partnering. The number of times that you hear the phrase partnering with either the local government or non-government sector or anybody, if in reality that partnering occurs at 10% of the time when partnering is referred to, I'll go he. That's a very low benchmark of a true level of partnership, and I think we should have a far, far higher aspiration for giving true life to it.
Okay, can I shift gear a little bit and talk about something a little bit more of the moment, which is the current IBack hearings, and I suspect the deep concern it raises with all of us in this room about the impact on the wider reputation of the VPS. I'd be interested in what you think needs to be done further to consolidate or promote and to consolidate an ethical pro-integrity culture within the VPS.
Okay, well, I think that's is one of the tragedies. It's a tragedy in a whole variety of levels. But one of the levels of tragedy in what's happening in being exposed in the current IBack hearings is, in fact, as you say, that in fact it is taken down by some people as being shorthand descriptor of public sector values or capability or lack thereof more broadly. And certainly that's not my experience of people who work in the public service. My personal experience, I feel that I've been blessed by the calibre of the work that I've felt as if I've been supported by and engaged with over time, the commitment and contribution of people in the public service. But in fact, just as my class, the political class, has actually read down, unfortunately, experiences like these IBack hearings write down the popular view or the lay person's simplistic view of public servants, and we need to collectively do something about that. Certainly in terms of some of the accountability frameworks within government, certainly I had within, well, as you would imagine, within a very appropriate conversations with secretaries about the way in which we're to revisit our systems, to have a look at the ability for decentralised or isolated decision making, which through the prism of grant programs or programs that may be not necessarily subjected to close scrutiny, to actually try to revisit those, to limit the opportunities for these types of accounting practices to occur. That's one basket of issues. In terms of, and we need to be vigilant about that. We need to be able to have confidence that in our reporting mechanisms to one another, as they articulate up, particularly through budgetary processes, but not exclusively budgetary processes, that internally we have some confidence about that, and we can actually take those internal disciplines and we can demonstrate that we've applied them. Beyond that, in terms of IBack itself, or any of the accountability bodies, IBack, the Auditor General, the Ombudsman, we've made commitments as an incoming government to provide IBack with better thresholds in relation to their investigative powers in terms of commencing proceedings, to follow them through. We have commitments made that will give the Auditor General follow the money powers, which is in fact something that's been a feature of the this Auditor General and previous Auditor General's concerns. We also understand that the Ombudsman has interests in how her powers articulate with IBack, and the Auditor General will try to ensure that they are harmonised to make sure that a line of investigation and inquiry can be appropriately pursued across those if necessary, that in fact they don't fall between any gaps, that in fact the cases are not closed prematurely, and that our citizenry can actually have some confidence in it. So it's a combination of some internal rigour in terms of the way in which we work ourselves, and then how we are seen to be accountable and kept accountable through those frameworks and those public bodies that I've outlined.
For a long time, I suppose we've looked at New South Wales and Queensland and sort of imagined that the problems they had at different times with their political culture or their public service culture and the allegations of inappropriate behaviour, that they were somehow a northern disease, and this wouldn't happen in Victoria. I'd be interested in what you see as the strengths or the important aspects of the Victorian political culture broadly defined that should underpin whatever changes the government chooses to make to the integrity system such as it is now.
Yes, well, thank you for an opportunity to revisit an article that I actually felt a little bit aggrieved by, as if I was set up by, that featured in the media recently. Some of you may have seen it. The interview that I actually gave, which was about probably 2 months before it was published, and I'd spent about an hour outlining just what I've just referred to you is in fact our reforms for IBack, our reforms to the Auditor General, our reforms to the Ombudsman's thinking. I'd actually outlined that in fact it was our intention to introduce those measures by the end of this year. Clearly articulated that. About half an hour later I was asked, well, is Victoria the same as New South Wales? And I said, well, we need to have rigour in our system so that in fact when evidence is brought to bear, when scrutiny is needed to be applied, that in fact we have a rigorous system that can account for it and in fact do justice to it. But beyond the sheer weight of evidence, there's a lot of evidence for decades, if not longer, that in New South Wales there are many, many embedded corrupt practices in the structures of decision making. I mean, it's been a feature of not only public perception for decades. So there is a qualitative difference on the evidence that has been brought to bear up until this point in time. Now, interestingly enough, that comment then was then appeared as the lead of the article, implying that in fact all the commitments that I'd made about improving our accountability and being alive to having a rigorous system to actually, when called upon to be able to apply itself, has actually been taken out of the story as if it did not exist, and which I thought was quite mischievous. But hopefully, now that you'll all be very clear about this, you can go out and share with your friends and anybody else who's read The Age to let them know of the construction of that story, and then in fact that it didn't necessarily adequately portray the view of the government.
Okay, and I mean, I'm not quite sure, there's probably a wide variety of perspectives on it, but out there in the voter land, out in the community, there is probably some questions being asked now about the degree to which what's being revealed as practice in education is happening in other parts of government. And is there something that the government or the public service can and should be doing to push back and ensure that there is a good appreciation of the qualities, the mechanisms that are in place, and can, in a sense, rebuild the trust that I would have thought was the case until the recent exposures?
Well, I think what we'd hope is this, by and large, is the exception to the rule, but we can't rely on that. Over time, if in fact that is proven to be the case, and we've actually proven to actually adopt a renewed vigour and rigour around the way in which we account for budget allocations or resource allocations, then those two things will hopefully allay the community's concern. I mean, but we are in a process where we need to rebuild trust. We actually accept as an incoming government that in fact governments are not well received by the citizenry. There's now questions about whether public servants are in fact doing insider trading, which we need to be able to lay to rest either by, we won't be stopping IBack or the Auditor General in their ability to be able to pursue these matters. In fact, we'll be assisting them in being able to do that. So in fact, we'll create a better structure of scrutiny. And we will not be defensive about making sure that those structures are available, and in fact we will not be defensive about when they are pursued. So we will be full participants in that. I think in terms of budget discipline, I think we are on notice to be able, both in terms of making sure that whatever allocations come within the output measures within the budget, they're as close as we can possibly identify to be tangible outcomes and deliverables to the community. And in fact, that's been a feature of budget preparations for quite some time. We'd actually have a look at how much further we should go in relation to that, running in parallel with the work that the Auditor General will be able to do with follow the money powers. I certainly know the Minister for Finance and myself are very keen on looking at better performance measures that we can apply to the rigour of outputs, and which may apply at a programmatic level. In fact, if we're successful in the method, we might apply that to departmental structures over time. That's a work in progress, so we're doing some work on that. So the better we can actually indicate what the value proposition to the community is, and the better we can be at actually being quite linear in being able to see how the financial flows of resources through departmental structures, the better. and the better we can be versed with IBack and the Auditor General's consideration, hopefully that'll hold us in good stead.
And how do you think we best strike the balance between, you know, a values approach or a rules approach?
Well, look, I don't want to break the mythology of what's been happening, but I knew about this question earlier, and I was particularly mindful of. I don't want to be paternalistic or patronising in my relationship with the public service, but I was instantly thought of my son. My son, really, who is a wonderful young man, has never been read the Riot Act. He's never functioned on the basis of actually the rules being very tightly articulated, and his value system I'm very proud of. His value system might be fairly consistent with mine. I'm not quite sure about that, but I thought of that instantly in relation to the way in which outcomes can be achieved, because clearly we need rules. Clearly we need to be clear about that. And in terms of when you're actually talking about a public sector or public values, they need to be articulated. Absolutely they do. We actually have to know the difference between right and wrong. We actually have to have a sense about what the value and the principal propositions we're talking about. And they have to be articulated. They have to be clear. Hopefully simple, actually, not too overly complicated. They need to be simply expressed, clearly expressed, and so that we know what we're going to be measured by. Okay, but beyond that, it's actually how we live. It's how we live. It's how we relate to one another. It's actually how we actually are seen to comply with them ourselves. And in fact, what we would be expecting of what we expect of others, we actually demonstrate in ourselves. And if we can have a virtuous relationship between those values and the rules, then in fact the rules become less and less important. They disappear, because in fact from time to time when the going gets tough, you actually may need to actually go back to them and actually reevaluate them. You may actually be caused to be measured by them in some very in a stressful environment. If it gets to an IBack situation or the Auditor General scrutiny, it might be. But in fact, by and large, I would actually hope that 99.9% of our engagement with the citizenry, our engagement with one another, we will successfully pass that test on the basis of what is our shared values and the way in which we live them.
Okay, we'll shift gears slightly. We've got a distinguished panel over here of ANZSOG alumni who are also senior public servants within the Victorian Public Service, and each of them have questions of the Minister, and I'd ask Judith to kick it off.
That was a beautiful segue, because where you really started the conversation, I think, was about your connection to the people you were serving back when you were working in Fitzroy. And when I think about this government, there's such a strong focus on what policy means for people, what reform means for people. And you touched on things like the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which fundamentally challenges government to change its thinking to be about what a person wants rather than what we might want to give them or what service providers might choose to give them. So do you have any advice for us in the room about how public servants might connect to really understand what people want so it drives and shapes how we think about and deliver policy and program into the future?
Okay. In fact, the great temptation for me in answering this question is for me to reduce it to being, the reason it's a bit risky is because at one level, in terms of I might be discounting the importance of ministers in public servants' life. And that'd be a terrible thing for me to do. But fundamentally, the answer to your question is being an enlightened and informed human being, and somebody who actually recognises that ultimately we do come together in this enterprise, which is public service, in the name of outcomes for our citizens, to enable them, to empower them, to respond to their needs. And as a first order issue, that should never be forgotten, never. And our challenge is, in fact, to be able to always be keen, see how that changes over time, to listen to how that need may be reflected, to actually celebrate when in fact there is some intervention and support or shared outcome where in fact it gives life to better outcomes for people. So in fact, often these sorts of conversations are through the prism of, well, how have we failed and how do we keep on getting, coming back? I want to acknowledge that in fact there are so many successes each and every day that we're engaged in. We should recognise that and value that and build on that, and that's part of our value proposition about how we engage. So I would encourage that always to be the case. So again, the application of knowledge in terms of best practice, where we can seek better advice, so we stay home and we actually see what the needs are. We actually see what the inspiration is. We actually search the horizon for the best approaches to things. We then work our way through an engagement of how to deliver that. That framing of that discipline is very useful for ministers if they're good ministers, because in fact ministers can pick them up and live off that, really. Now, the best ministers will in fact be part of that organism that gets you there. But even if they're not with the program, creating that is, in my way, and this is the reason why I have a residual interest in the public service, I think that's the hope of the side.
Minister, I was so pleased to hear you say and encourage us to be courageous in the way that we go about our work, particularly because obviously when we all work together we can achieve fantastic things. One of those I'm interested to hear about is particularly how we value and progress achievement in terms of our natural environment. And what I've observed is that we have a challenging institutional arrangement where departments brief ministers of respective portfolios, and when we're looking at investment in the environment compared to other areas, often the sort of competitive tension can play out, which means that it falls lower on the list of priorities. Given your experience in the environment portfolio, do you have any advice for us in terms of how we best present a whole of government story to ensure that environment considerations are taken into account? And then how do we as the public service best, I guess, work courageously and present a whole of government perspective for decision making?
Well, I think that's not a Dorothy. That's not a Dorothy. That question. That's not a Dorothy. Look, I think it has been such a perplexing issue for any number of governments, any jurisdictions, in terms of actually trying to acquit what is our fundamental environmental obligation, and to free ourselves of actually thinking of that as a constraint, and always as actually coming at the opportunity cost to economic activity or well-being, or which bedevils us regularly. This government, the Victorian government, Australian government, internationally, it's seen that way. I'm a bit disappointed to actually say that, to report in that by the end of 2000, the last term of the Labor government, we had chosen, for a variety of reasons, that in fact climate change and environmental challenge that was evident to us at the time was a huge opportunity for economic transformation of the state. Now, it didn't make a difference in the ballot box. We weren't returned in 2010. But in fact, I personally saw that was a very liberating time, because in fact we had a very detailed and very adventurous agenda, which on the basis of the economic transformation of the state in terms of a trajectory in relation to coal, which was down, a trajectory in relation to renewable energies, which was up in terms of emerging technologies, the coincidence of innovation and the environment, which had the good fortune to be responsible for both of those, was the type of, in terms of the enthusiasm of bringing a proactive agenda which actually satisfied economic well-being, was actually a job creating in a portfolio, at the same time acquitting some of our major environmental obligations or challenges. That to me makes a perfect sense of actually how you reconcile what is often seen by governments as being difficult to reconcile. I have to actually say that it disappoints me greatly that with very few exceptions, and certainly at that time was one of them, the industry portfolios have default settings as articles of faith, that they can't be reconciled. I think they have default settings, that's the case. Not to ignore that, in fact, in the last few years, coincidence of the global financial crisis, the reduction in the focus across the world in many ways in terms of those pressures, plus, for instance, in Victoria it started to rain again, people think less of the climate change agenda. It's only a matter of time before actually that cycle comes back into our thinking. We need to rebuild that reconciled thinking. And we're capable of doing it. We just have to work hard to do it.
Bronwyn.
Minister, I was hoping we could return to integrity and perception as well. So even before the more recent integrity matters sort of hit the media, the head office public service, as distinct from frontline service delivery, has had a much maligned reputation, and the capacity of the public at large to understand the value that we deliver is limited. But to be effective in the future, we need to be able to attract and retain a new generation of smart, creative and committed people. What do you think we can do to improve the way that the public service is perceived, and do you see a role for yourself as Special Minister of State in that capacity?
I certainly do want to see that as part of what my responsibilities are. I want to actually enthuse people about seeing public service as a very rewarding experience that is actually valued internally, but most importantly valued within the community generally. And I volunteer this to you to actually, I remember, actually say what year it was. It's a long time ago. One of my friends tried to enthuse me about joining the public service. This is many, many years ago. And I dismissed it because, in fact, I thought it was a limiting career choice. And I thought that I had a higher commitment to public outcomes in terms of political outcomes. And I thought that I would have diminishing returns in the public service. And I volunteer to you as an error of judgment of mine. I'm not actually rewinding my career. It's 2 or 3 decades, but I volunteer to you that was my limited view about what the public service could do and what it certainly is capable of doing, and certainly just as I have learnt, I'm happy to share that learning and to make this a great place to work. But part of, to answer your question, basically the cumulative effect of everything I've said since we've been here is actually required to do that. We need to actually have mature relationships, sophisticated relationships in our working life. That's from ministers to executives, through the public service, through the public sector, through the non-government agencies, out into communities, that in fact is mature, respectful, enlightened, fleet of foot to actually emerging issues. And if we don't, unfortunately, we'll be discounted. There'll always be discounting at our expense in relation to those perceptions. But in some ways, that's a healthy dynamic to live up to. Really, if we actually because ultimately we're tested. We're actually tested every day. And being tested every day not necessarily in a NAPLAN way, but in a way where in fact it is an intellectual and emotional challenge to us. That's actually quite pretty good dynamic, actually. So long as there is a recognition of the contribution, and that's something that I'm very happy to work with the leadership of the public service to try to find out how we can celebrate that, reward it, and encourage it.
Okay, we've got 15 or so minutes for questions from the audience. There's a question up the back there. Someone is going to come to you with a microphone.
One of the things that I recall coming out of IBack was there was somebody who raised some questions, and her experience was that those questions were diminished, and partly because of what she described as a bullying culture. And I'm wondering about that connection between bullying, integrity and creativity, and how often that sort of experience of feeling that you've been shut down reduces your ability to cooperate and join up with an opportunity that might be available. I wondered if you'd had any time to reflect on how you in your role might address those sorts of phenomenon.
Okay, well, certainly, so in terms of just going through the current hearings in education just for a second to then come back to the answer to that question. So whilst there may, I'm assuming you're talking about the education experience, okay. Ultimately, whilst that person, that informant may have felt as that they'd been blocked in some shape or form, ultimately, whether it was their information or somebody else's information, ultimately it was not blocked within the organisation, it was identified and pursued. So ultimately, it was responded to appropriately and passed on. So even within that bad experience, in fact, ultimately there was a corrective mechanism that took place and some responsibility was taken place. We need to actually find the right open form and the confidence that both in terms of adequately responding to issues and driving outcomes and getting some sense of justice, but by being sufficiently open to enable complaints to come in or concerns to come in. That's a balancing act that obviously we need to do some work on. The backdrop of hopefully better practice, more confidence in one another, but also goodwill that we actually find through various mechanisms. So I'm very happy to engage at this level. I actually, reputationally, I have a track record of actually being stopped on many street corners and having very long conversations with people. My office are not that impressed with that work practice, but nonetheless, it's actually a reoccurring theme. But most important, but structurally, I'm very keen to. So temperamentally, I'm keen to work on it. Structurally, I'm very happy to work with secretaries about those basket of issues, and we've already had some good conversations with the secretaries about that.
The question up the back up there.
I think my question was part answered by the previous one, but really it's an extension of the discussion on the IBack hearings. It would appear from the hearings that the culture was systemically associated with bullying and intimidation and harassment, and it was allowed to continue for some time, according to the hearings. And I guess in part response to the question that's raised on the screen, are we there yet? It would appear that we're not in relation to addressing systemic issues like that. And I just wonder, as an extension of the commentary you've already made on that issue, what do we need to do to progress the if you like, the values and the rules and the culture to get over these issues?
Well, the thing about are we there yet, I think, is actually on the whole basket of issues that we've been talking about, not necessarily through the prism of what's been exposed in IBack. I think it's from my vantage point, it's a sense of momentum that is required in terms of, it's distinct from complacency. So when Peter asked in his very first question, is Victoria the best public service? Well, I wouldn't assume that it is. I think it's our collective challenge to prove that it will be. And that's where I'd like to take it. So we shouldn't be complacent in any shape or form. I think in the coming weeks, it's my intention to reinforce what I've been conveying to you today through outlining ways in which, with my colleagues, we engage upon a confidence building within the public service, capability within the public service, the public sector more broadly, reaffirming a commitment to working in collaboration not only amongst ourselves but within the community, and finding tangible ways of demonstrating that, which will include, some things that we'll do in our own sake in terms of our professional development and our values, some things in relation to the accountability frameworks, some about in terms of the integrity bodies, some things to do about the way in which we develop policy into the future and try to have stakeholder community engagement in the way in which policy settings are set in the future. We intend to move on all of those things. So they won't be a hidden feature of my life, and hopefully not something that doesn't touch you.
Question down the front here.
Hi, thank you. To tie the integrity and the public opinion questions together a bit, do you feel like we have a new employee in our group from New Zealand, and we're all amazed to hear that briefs are routinely published publicly. And it made me wonder if the lack of a mature relationship with the public and an understanding and trust from the public could come from our habitual secrecy in our work practices. Do you reckon that there's I mean, I know that there's an ad out there for opening government, but do you think that that might play a role?
Yes, it does. Let me actually just say, send that person from New Zealand back. No. One of the things that struck me when we came to this building, and in fact I don't know that we're much better now, when we came into this building just here, just after being elected, all the blinds were down. All the blinds were down, okay? I thought that was a very symbolic thing. Our challenge is to actually lift those blinds. Okay? So how fast we get to answer your question, there's a variety of ways that we can start revisiting that. My first day was to wind up some blinds. I want to continue to wind up some blinds.
That's a great place for us to finish. Our promise about timing means that we've got to wind it up now. There are a couple of things I want to draw your attention to. The most important of which is that without any direct relationship with this forum, the Victorian Public Service Commission has recently reissued codes of conduct for Victorian public sector employees and for public sector employees of special bodies. So any of you who haven't seen them should go onto the website or contact the office and get a copy for yourself. Probably the most important thing I need to do is to thank Gavin, and I'd ask you to join me in thanking Gavin for an unusually frank and constructive explication of what the government is committed to doing. Can I also thank our panel members for their contribution to the forum today. There are a couple of announcements very quickly. On Monday the 10th of August, we ANZSOG have a program called Leadership for a Fractured World, How to Cross Boundaries, Build Bridges and Lead Change, which Dean Williams, an Australian who now works at the Kennedy School, will be leading that program. And for those of you who have even longer range planning, on the 28th of October, George Aguirres, who any of you who've completed the Executive Master of Public Administration would have had contact with, George is leading us through the mysteries of statistical modelling with a timely focus on picking the Melbourne Cup winner. ANZSOG's conference is also in the final stages of organisation and is scheduled in Melbourne on the 5th and 6th of August. I've also been asked to remind you that as per normal conduct or normal follow-up, you'll get an opportunity to provide feedback on this forum. Go onto the website and provide that, which helps us improve the planning and delivery of these forums in the future. There'll also be, as you've seen, this has been videotaped, and you'll be able to go onto the website and follow up any aspect of it that you want to, or probably more importantly, letting any of your colleagues who were not able to be here know that it's there and they can follow it up. Not least because I think it's rare to get such an open and engaged vision from a minister about what the forward agenda is going to be and the problems as he sees them at present that need to be addressed. So I'd ask you again to join me in thanking Minister Jennings.